Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the Williamsburg City Council work session of October 11th. Lika, would you call the roll, please?
Mr. Rogers.
Here.
Ms. Ramsey.
Here.
Mayor Pons.
Here.
Vice Mayor Dent.
Here.
Mr. Maslin.
Here. Welcome. So today, item 3 on the agenda is items for City Council meeting of October 14th. Mr. Trivet, council preview.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. We do have sort of a lengthy agenda for Thursday. We're going to start out with some public hearings. The first one is a public hearing to consider adding public art as a use in all of the non-residential zoning districts. And then we're going to talk about, the next couple public hearings have to do with the fish relocation to 2nd Street. And then our next public hearing is discussion of a slope waiver for development in the 30% area for 4200 Battery Boulevard, the next expansion at the Riverside development at Quarter Path. Then we have a license agreement for William and Mary to do some work on the Lake Matoka Dam along Jamestown Road. From that, we move into new business, where we will have a budget amendment. We've got a resolution that establishes our ability to reimburse ourselves for costs associated with a future police station project. Then we have the purchase of a new ambulance. We have the hiring of a contractor to serve as construction management for the fire station. And we have, we have an ordinance to move the assessment process to what's called a hybrid process. So it'll start earlier so that we're finished by the time